The old McLaren factory was part of an ageing industrial estate, and from the outside it blended in with the other innocuous run-of-the-mill companies sharing the site. Walk through the black glass doors though and you entered Ron's world. Hey guys, welcome to another Tales from the Treehouse, where today I'm going to be talking about the period of time when McLaren moved into what is still one of the most impressive and advanced facilities in the world of Formula One, the MTC. When I first got into Formula One and into McLaren, even that old factory, long before MTC even existed, for someone like me who'd grown up in motorsport and always dreamt of making it into the hallowed halls of Formula One, even that building was like a cross between Buckingham Palace and Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Everything was impressive, spotless, futuristic, intriguing and expensive. I was scared to touch anything but wanted to touch it all. And that's exactly how I felt, you know, walking in for my very first day on the job in the old McLaren factory, which was just a very industrial shell, was mind-blowing. Ron had created an enigmatic, mysteriously secretive and almost impenetrable facility that matched the glamour and exclusivity of the F1 paddock. And when I finally got the privilege of being allowed inside, I was as impressed as anyone could be. And that, of course, is exactly what Ron wanted, to impress people. To work inside that building was often frustrating. You know, it was immaculate and spotless, or so I thought, at all times. You know, this was just an industrial shell of a building, and yet inside it was almost more like a hospital operating theatre than it was the sort of place that cars were being built. However, if the old factory had some annoying rules and procedures in terms of keeping it clean and tidy, it was absolutely nothing compared to the futuristic, spaceship-like showpiece that became our new HQ, the McLaren Technology Centre, or MTC. Make no mistake, MTC was Ron's baby. Opened in 2003, it encapsulated everything he stood for and was a direct extension of his personality and characteristics. It also showed just how tenacious and driven he was to see his futuristic visions right through to reality, and for that I have nothing but total awe. The old factory was as good as it could have been, given it was a rented building on a Woking industrial estate. It served a purpose and the team won Formula One World Championships from within it. But Ron needed to have total control, and he couldn't do that whilst at the behest of a landlord. And that was Ron summed up, wasn't it? He needed to be in control. That was his company, it was his team, it was his organisation, run the way Ron wanted it to run. Everything about McLaren was done Ron's way, and that's part of the reason it was so successful. So when we moved into a new facility, we all knew that it was going to be something a bit special. I mean, the talk of this began very, very early on, a few years, of course, before we ever moved in, whilst we were still working in that Woking industrial estate. And I remember at the time being shown plans for this futuristic vision, and that is what it was, futuristic, mind-blowingly futuristic. And most people within that McLaren organisation looked at these plans or the model that we were presented with and thought, wow, I mean, that's amazing stuff, but we're not going to see that in my lifetime at the team. I guess if I'm honest, I didn't really see that as being reality. I thought it was one of these pie-in-the-sky type ideas, a dream. But the thing about Ron was, he dreamt and then he made it happen. It all seemed to happen pretty quickly for such an enormous project. But before we knew it, the team was being taken for construction site visits to the new location, only about a mile up the road from where we were. The surrounding area was beautiful, nestled away from the traffic in one of the greenest, quietest parts of the Surrey countryside. It was hard to believe we were so close to the uninspiring, industrialised zone of our current building. Amazingly, we were locating our new factory on greenbelt land, which tells me that Ron probably used his persuasive powers to get an exceptional deal with conditions. One of the planning restrictions was that the building couldn't go over a certain height or be visible from the road. So, not to be outdone or overly restricted, we decided to build underground. So you've probably seen the building today. It's incredibly impressive from the outside, but all you can see from the outside is these perfectly manicured grounds and this futuristic style construction. What lies beneath that are a number of floors of increasingly impressive subterranean levels. And of course, what's on the inside that you don't very often get to see, well, you can imagine. It's even more impressive than what's on the outside. Of course, the doomsayers at McLaren predicted it would be a difficult place to work, a building that was so focused on looking good, neglecting that it was actually a place to design, manufacture and build Formula One cars. For me, I thought the state-of-the-art facilities and equipment, together with a beautiful and inspirational environment, would be enough to outweigh any impracticalities. In the end, when we finally moved in during the 2003 season, both camps could actually claim that they've made quite an accurate assessment. Yeah, it was difficult. We moved in, I remember the day we moved in, it was obviously in between races. Somebody took all of our equipment, but then we literally got into buses and moved from one site up to the other. And walking into that empty building where it's just gleaming in every direction, perfectly aligned tiles as far as the eye could see from one end of the building to the other, not a millimetre out, as you can probably imagine from Ron Dennis. And I'm sure nothing was cheap. These were not cheap tiles. These were probably the most expensive, the finest, the most exquisite tiles you can imagine. The workbenches were just pristine and immaculate. The tool chests were all perfectly aligned, white, glimmering in the, overly done lighting around the whole place. This was a showroom. It was very clear it was a showroom for McLaren as much as it was going to be a place that we would be working. The day we moved in, a lot of the older guys were really sad to be leaving the old factory. They'd worked there for a long time and a lot of them had experienced a number of dramatic chapters in the McLaren story and enjoyed some major success in their time there. Change had come hard for some of them. They were comfortable with what they already had. But I was different. I was a cheeky young whippersnapper of a lad who'd only been with McLaren for a couple of years, and I couldn't wait to get up the road and unpack. And when we did get up there and unpack, it was like taking ownership of this incredible place. If you ever moved into a new home, it was that feeling. This was our new home. And not only was it this beautiful, immaculate, shiny place to look at, which always is quite inspiring and gives you a nice, fresh start feeling, but this was packed full of the finest equipment, the very best resources. We were a team perhaps at the height of our wealth during that period of the tobacco-sponsored era, partnered of course with Mercedes as well. We had the best, the very best that money could buy. And for an engineer, someone who's working with tools and equipment all day, well, that's an amazing feeling. Everything was shiny and spotlessly clean and ultimately bloody impressive. It felt like we were working on a magazine shoot or a film set with a series of spectacular views from the race bays that overlooked the lake outside and acres of manicured grounds beyond. There was a lot that was aesthetically so much better, and we had to be hugely grateful for that. Very quickly though, the challenges of working inside a giant, pristine showroom began to present themselves. And it wasn't perfect. There were some issues like where the race bays were, where we would be working and building the cars. In relation to where the trucks were parked, we had to, with a fully constructed car at the end of a build before we went to a race, negotiate on little wheelie trolleys a series of incredibly tight, intricate turns to get it around these corners where the car's just about fitted, and then all the way through the building to the opposite side where we'd have to push them outside into the trucks. None of us could quite fathom why on earth it hadn't been designed with the race bays and the truck bays, places that were almost intrinsically linked to each other, right next to each other. The sheer size of the building meant it took longer to get anywhere than it had before. The departments we needed to visit regularly, either to deliver or collect parts, or even just to talk to people, could be a long way away. It slowed the whole working process down, where we were often up against the clock. Meanwhile, new rules meant that there was to be no more coffee in the race bays. No more coffee? Come on, you know me, I can't deal with no coffee. But we weren't allowed to have things on the benches other than what we were working on. It was just crazy. Often I felt like I was spending more time cleaning and polishing the area that I was working in than actually doing anything that might make a racing car go any quicker. For all its nuances and impracticalities though, the MTC was and is a stunning building to look at, which is exactly, of course, what Ron had set out to achieve. He wanted to be able to show off the premises to impress clients and sponsors, and as with everything he did, he wanted MTC to be the best in the business. It's always easy to criticise ideas that don't work well or any projects that might have deviated from the norm, but the reality was that McLaren's new HQ was a marketing tool as much as it was an engineering facility, and that function in the end was just as important to the business. And I do believe that Perhaps not so much when I worked there, because it was often difficult to work in, but definitely since, when I look back, that building was a massive, massive success for McLaren. Yes, we had the best facilities, and it might have been a bit more tricky, a bit more impractical on a number of different levels, but there were so many things, a wealth of things that were just better. The things we had to our disposal, the working facilities that we were in, the tools, the equipment, the views, the inspiration. If you were a designer in that place, looking out your window, it's just full of inspirational material. It is and was an amazing, amazing place. Shortly after moving in, the Queen, yes, Her Majesty the Queen, came to officially open up the factory. And whilst the place was locked down by the biggest security operation I'd ever seen, I, believe it or not, was chosen as one of a handful of people to meet her as Ron gave her the grand tour. After a formal briefing on how to address Her Majesty and the strict lists of do's and don'ts of royal etiquette, I promptly forgot the lot because as she arrived, she put her hand out to shake mine, and instead of just graciously shaking her hand, I put both hands out, held her hand with my other hand, which is apparently against all the rules, and got some massive evil eyes from the security team alongside her. The fact that the UK's ruling monarch came to Ron's new factory to open it up, and then a few years later, the British Prime Minister David Cameron came to open McLaren Automotive's new building next door, says a lot about the kind of man that Ron was, not to mention the kind of business he was leading. We were highly respected. People regarded McLaren as being the most professional team in the business. We were considered to be one of the most innovative too, and having a successful spell at McLaren on your CV did you no harm at all. What had begun years ago as just a small F1 team was now a group of market-leading global technology companies, and every single part of it was based on Ron Dennis's personality and values. And I think that's what I want to leave you with from this chapter, was that I have huge, huge respect for Ron, not just because of the MTC, but for everything he did. But the MTC kind of sums it all up. It kind of puts it all into one tangible object. He was a visionary, he was a dreamer, but he wasn't just going to dream and let those things float away into the distance. He was the kind of dreamer that followed up on his dreams until they were done. Nobody believed that MTC would actually happen, and certainly not turn out like the model that we'd been shown years earlier. But it absolutely did. He built an impossible building in an impossible place and made it impossibly impressive. And I, for one, am very grateful to have had the opportunity to work there. Right, that's it for another Tales from the Treehouse. I hope you liked that one, guys. If you'd like to check out more of these tales from up here in the Treehouse, well, there's a playlist on the channel now of all of these things. I think there's around 10 so far. Some brilliant stories. I'll link it up in the corner and, of course, at the end in the description too. Go check them out, and I'd love to know if you've got any other thoughts on what you'd like covering up here. Any stories from the book, which of course is also linked in the description if you're interested, but also any other stories that I may have been a part of in my time in Formula One that you'd like expanded on from my own personal experience. Just let me know in the comments and I will do my very best. In the meantime, have a great weekend and I'll catch you all very soon. Ta-da!